Hello everyone, I'm Dennis Burns from Boulder Sounds. I'll be giving you a brief tutorial on how to use the Midi files, which are included in Bluegrass Banjo version 3 sample library for Native Instruments Kontakt. This is just to give you some suggestions as to how you might use these files. I do get a lot of emails from keyboard players saying, how's the banjo actually played? I really don't know how to do a convincing sequence, etc. So these Midi files will give you a glimpse into very common what are called roll patterns, which are really just basically arpeggios, maybe a little melodic line in there with a blue note or something like that. We've done this instead of including what's called the roll instrument from version 2. We've deleted that, and we're going to have the Midi files in this version because we feel it's much more flexible. You can play them back at any speed. You can transpose them. You could quantize them, so very flexible, and they match, of course, the sampled banjo absolutely perfectly because that's what they're actually using. So let's dive in. Thanks very much for watching. So here we are in Logic, and all these principles apply to every sequencer or DAW. Certainly some things are done differently, but it'll have certain commonalities. Hopefully this will be helpful. So first thing is, in your folder, so here I just have it on my desktop, it's called Banjo Midi files. We have 3 folders, one called Banjoisms, one called Chords, and one called Variations. I'll explain the Banjoisms later. The chords are just block chords. They're strummed on a MIDI guitar, so it gives you a very authentic sound of strumming a chord. They're not continuous strums, they're just punctuation chords for endings of sections or little brief hits. We have long and short chords as well. And key switches are inserted so that when you strum across the strings, it actually triggers the samples in the correct order, from the 4th string to the 3rd string to the 2nd string to the 1st string, and so on. Now, if I open the Variations folder, this is the most important one, I think. You'll notice we have a list of chords. Let's say I want to open G major folder. We're going to do a progression in the key of G since it's so common on the banjo. The banjo is tuned to an open G chord. Notice we have something that says, let me move this to the center, G, all variations. And then below that we have separate MIDI files. So the way I'm going to work today is I'm going to show you how to take a long MIDI file and we're going to select short MIDI files out of it. It seems like a quick way to audition things. I think you'll find it to be real useful. However, if you prefer to use short MIDI files, that's fine. They're there for you to work that way. And I'm going to just drag these in off my desktop. There's other ways to do this. You can use a browser in Logic or your sequencer to do it, but I'll just do it kind of the quick way that I do it. Now, something very important first. Notice here in the Kontakt instrument, so here's Kontakt Bluegrass Banjo version 3. We want to go down to the drop-down menu here on the main panel, and we want to go to the key switch page. The reason we're going to do that is up here on this drop-down menu, I have it set to MIDI files preset. When you open your banjo, it'll be set to default. So the reason we want to change this to MIDI files, you don't have to, but I would strongly recommend it. What it does is it takes the key switches that trigger things like slides, hammer-ons, harmonics, etc., and it moves them outside of the range and gives quite a bit of distance from the main banjo MIDI notes, which are in blue on your Kontakt keyboard right there. Why do you want to do this? Well, because when you start editing things, you start moving notes around or transposing or selecting everything out of a score editor or a matrix editor. You want to be able to just drag them and move them very easily and not have the key switches affected, because the key switches are important. They impart, a very important style on the sequence itself. So we don't want to mess with those. So this gets them out of the way. That's basically what it does. So I suggest you do that. Change it to MIDI files. This is the key switch mapping page. And then we'll go back to the articulation page. So now we're back at the main banjo. Let me just move this out of the way for a moment. And, I need a D here. I'll explain that in a moment. Okay. All right, so now what we do is I'm going to go to my folder of MIDI files. I'm going to start with G. And you can see in Logic here, I have made some tracks. I have a master track on the top. That's where our sequence is going to be assembled. We're going to take little pieces of each of the G, C, and D chords. We're going to cut them whatever order we want. I'm going to move them to the top track. That will become my main track. And below that I have a track for G, one for C, one for D, a 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of G. So another thing about the way this is set up, all these tracks are accessing just one instance of logic, of Kontakt. They're all set to the same MIDI channel, and I'm using these on-off buttons here on the left side to mute the tracks. So the reason we're doing that rather than having 4 instances of Kontakt is because it's just not efficient. So we can have all these tracks pointed at one instance of Kontakt. So that will vary depending on the DAW or sequencer that you're working in, how that function is taken care of. So move Kontakt back here. So in my main G track, I'm just going to drag G, all variations MIDI. So let's see what happens. See if I can get it in the right place. Oh, one measure short. So you can see your MIDI files here, and they're separated by an empty measure. So these are 2-bar MIDI files, and if you want to hear it, you just turn that track on, and we can audition them. Get the idea? So you can hear there's some slides in there triggered by key switches. Right, there's a little slide in there. So we get different voicings of G major chords, different variations of patterns and different ranges. Some are low, some are mid, some are higher on the instrument. Okay, so what do I do if I want to use, for example, the 3rd pattern in my main sequence? So what I do is, in Logic, I'm going to just use the scissor tool, and I don't have this set up correctly ahead of time. Yes, I do. Okay, and I'm going to cut that sequence right there, and I'm going to cut it on the other side of the 2-bar pattern, and I'm going to copy that to my first track, right? And then I'm going to mute the second track, so I'm only hearing the first track, so I'm just hearing this sequence. Okay, so that's how the process is going to work of selecting small sequences out of these longer sequences. So just randomly, I'll just do a couple more just so you can see it. And it gets pretty quick once you learn this in your DAW. And the reason I copy the track is because I may want to refer back to what did I use in that place. If I just cut it, then of course it's going to be missing. I'll cut it just to show you what that would look like. So here, if I just move it, you can see now there's a hole in my sequence. So personally, I prefer not to do that. I suggest just leave the main track. It'll gradually get sliced up, but your composite track on track 1 there will be the one you're actually going to use. So the same process goes for the other chord sequences. So there's my G chord variations. I'm going to go to C, which is my 4 chord, and I'm going to take all variations. I'm going to drag them into that track and do that. And I'll mute the first 2 tracks, and let's hear a little bit of the C variations. That's a real basic one. Right, so, and you can see that one has a slide in it, triggered by a key switch. And then I'm going to go to my D folder and do the same thing. So I just open up D, all variations, drag it in there. And I'm going to turn on just track 4 so I can hear that and pick something from there. So you get the idea. So let's say I want that track. I'll just cut it and I'll copy it to track, hopefully to track 1. Okay, so this is my assembled track up here. But I'm going to save you the tedium of going through the whole chord progression that I've done. I've actually done this ahead of time. So let's move farther ahead here so you can see the track that I've assembled. Somewhere up here, yeah. So what I've done now is I've color-coded these according to the chord progression. The G is the blue, the C progressions are the green, the violet color is D, and the blue at the very end is an ending chord, and I'll show you how that works. So here's what we have now after assembling, and you can see below on these tracks, you can see what I've cut from. You can see the slices in each of the G, C, and D chord progression MIDI track. So here's what we have right now. This is being played at 200 beats a minute. Okay, and that final chord there was just brought in from the chords folder. And that's an actual voicing of a G major chord on the banjo. So I can go up to the chords. And we have diminished chords, long and short articulations, major chords, and minor chords. All right. So now what do we do once we have the sequence assembled? Well, you might be happy with it as it is, but if we want to go a little further, here's some other options. So quantization. So I'll just have Logic give it a little bit of a swing feel. These are eighth notes, so I'm going to go to swing B, which is not too extreme swing. Okay, what if I use some key switches? This is kind of fun. You just randomly hold down some key switches. You want to find where they are in your Kontakt on your keyboard. So for example, watch the front panel of Kontakt here. So this is my key switch for the hammer-ons. There's my pull-offs. Here's a whole step slide to G. Here's a half step slide, harmonics, and muting. So you can have a bit of fun with that. Just simply let the sequence play and trigger a few of those just randomly and just see what happens. So here's I'll give it a go. I shouldn't have done a slide on the chord, of course. It makes it sound like a dobro. So you get the idea. There's lots of different variations you can create with just playing with the key switches in real time. You might want to slow down your sequencer in order to get those right on the spots where you want them. But it's kind of fun to do a random approach as well. Okay, what about this Banjoisms folder? Well, there are certain things that are characteristically done on the banjo, and they're a little bit of a pain to sequence, so we've done these little variations to get you started with. So for example, let me just take Banjoism number 1 here. Let's choose a different one. Let's go with 3. See what happens when we play that one. Not very exciting, is it? But let me slow it down. So take a look at the score here. If I can get Kontakt out of the way. We have a D note. And what's happening there is you're hearing a slide on one string into a D note, and then you're hearing another string playing the same note. That's a very common thing in banjo playing and, you know, certain kinds of guitar playing. Let me just grab a guitar. So a very common thing is this, is you might, on the second string of the instrument, slide. This is obviously a guitar, not a banjo, but the principle is the same. I'm sliding from C to D, and then I play the first string open, which is also a D. So I have 2 Ds resonating. So you can get all these kind of cool effects. Same thing on the G string. I can slide into a B note and then play the open B. On the D string, I can slide into a G note and play the open G. Right? And so on. So that's what I'm trying to imitate here. Or not trying to imitate it, we're just creating it with a MIDI file. So that's one of the Banjoisms. And they're set up, they're a little tricky to set up, so we've set them up for you so they won't be so difficult to do. So it'll be easier on you. Let's see what this one is. So that, as you can see in the score window, that's the slide into the B note. Okay. Let's see, which ones do we have here? I don't know. Here's another banjoism. Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting, and you can, if you watch Kontakt, I'll slow it down even more. Watch the front panel of Kontakt here. We have a hammer-on that's triggered by a key switch right there. Right, so that's the same as doing this. We also, that's a G chord. We also have another one set up where you do it with a C chord, this kind of thing. And so on, okay? And one last thing I'd like to mention, this may be very obvious, but I want to show it to you anyway. So if I click on my first G sequence here, let me move this up a little bit so you can see the score window. So here's the arpeggio pattern. Just editing is very simple. Once we have this set up in a Midi file, for example, let's say I want to make this D and E. I want to go up to A here. Okay, so now we've changed the, let me move this up to 175. We've changed that sequence that easily. Okay, I'm going to go back here a little bit. Right, okay, here's a C major chord. Down here is the high G of the banjo. The fifth string is a high G string. So let's say I want to change the voicing of this C chord. Real easy. I'm going to keep the top voice C here. I'm going to go down to B, back to C, up to D. Right? And then again, you know, adding in slides and so on. You know, could potentially make it better or totally ruin it, but you can experiment and edit to your heart's content. So I hope that gives you just an overview of what's here in the Midi banjo files for Bluegrass Banjo version 3. And thanks for watching. Have fun. Bye-bye.